This is the Minecraft Forgotten Feature Iceberg. Inside are 51 secrets from Minecraft's past, hidden in the game's code. But not all of them are gone forever. Starting first, back when Minecraft had nightmares. Back in the beta versions of the game, if you were to sleep with monsters nearby, it could summon a skeleton or zombie and awake you. So you would wake up suddenly to find yourself getting eaten alive, much like this guy. Sorry, bud. But this was ultimately removed, and instead it would just replace the message with, "You may not rest now, there are monsters nearby." When the enchantments were first introduced, it didn't matter what tool you enchanted. And because of that, efficiency would increase all of our mining speed on everything. That includes me going against all of these blocks here, all of the leaves, all of the wood logs, everything. All of it would break faster. And it's not just that, I could also apply efficiency to the wrong idea. This is still possible in creative, but what you used to be able to do is apply enchantments to things and it would still apply. So if I had like efficiency 5 and a thing of bread, then I could have the most efficient bread in the business, which you could do in creative, but it wasn't gonna make it like the most powerful tool in human history. Infinite durability plus 26 mining efficiency when I hover over it in my hand. So this was ultimately changed to need the required block type in 1.4.5. But before then, it was just optimal to use only 1 or 2 tools enchanted, and you could have it do all purposes. So in the past, farmland used to decay a lot more. So the way that we would dispel against that is that we would place fences underneath like so. And just by having a fence underneath, that could be completely dispelling it from updating into a regular non-farmland block. So if I go and step on this, usually it would dry out over time if you didn't have any water here, but this was ultimately removed and fixed in the full release of 1.0. All right, on to our next one deeper on the iceberg. We've got the classic healing situation, which is that in the past, food items didn't used to stack. But the benefit for this was that anytime that you needed to heal up, food was an instant consume. So we didn't have a hunger bar for a lot of the game's history. And then if I wanted to eat, I could just right click like so and get my health back. Oh, there we go. Yeah, instant eat. And cookies, I believe, could originally stack up to 8, but they weren't going to give you a lot of health, so it wasn't like it was the best food source. It was just the only one that was stackable. This is a feature that not many people notice, but if you hit F3 and C in Java Edition, and then Control V, you can have it teleport you to those commands at any point. So that basically copies your location. So if I place that anywhere, if I'm over here, and then I hit F3 and C, then I can go run up here, and I will always have my location copied for an easy paste command, like so. It even keeps me looking in the same direction. Pretty nifty. So the next update allows us to save our hotbars with the help of shelves, but there's actually a way to currently do this with creative. So by default, you would hold the C key and then press one of these numbers to save it into that hotbar slot. And then if I hit X1, it will restore it. I've got my hotbar saved, easy peasy. And the good thing about this is that it saves NBT too. So if I were to get like a shulker box and then load in a bunch of items into that shulker box, you could have every slot in your hotbar be an individual shulker box. So if I have all of these set up like so, and then I go X1, it changes over to here, and then X2, I have all of my shulker boxes with everything saved inside. Going deeper in, we've got a feature that many people don't recognize with rabbits is that they'll actually go after carrot crops. And eventually, this rabbit will go and actually find the carrot crops and hunt them down and break them. Oh, sure enough. So it didn't fully break the crop, it just decreased the level of it, making it so that your carrots really aren't growing when you got rabbits around. If I were to have a mob in a bucket, any of these, like so, and then take them into an anvil and rename them. So if I were to just take my tadpole and rename it to Lad Tad, not only does that change the item name, but it also will give a name to the tadpole inside. And then is that maintained if I were to bucket it again too? Sure enough, it gives me the named item right there. So if you want to name your pet axolotl without having to waste a name tag, this is a cheap way to do it. Just one level and you're there. All right, getting deeper into our forgotten features. Hey, Sniffer. What we've got here is an old player trap. And the reason that this would work is that player hitboxes used to be too big for this 1x1 space. So if Observer also came down here, what would happen is that there was no possible way for either of us to break out without just hitting the other one. But now if we look at player hitboxes, you can see with mine, it is smaller than this 1x1 space. You used to be able to punch sheep to get their wool, because before we had shears to go and shear our sheep, the old way to do it was just that you would punch them hard enough to get the wool to knock out. And here's an example. Oh, look, 4 wool and a headless sheep. How quaint. This one gave me potatoes. Awesome. And it wasn't until beta 1.7 that we actually got a proper way to shear our sheep. But we still never got the planned feature of using the shears to defuse our TNT either. What we have here is a potion effect that you're only probably going to see if you go through the game's files, the luck effect. It's probably not as special as it seems, but sure enough, if I were to drink this up and then go fishing, it'll apply to the loot table that I get from something like fishing. So think of it like the Luck of the Sea enchantment, except as a potion. But considering there's no way to get this inside of regular survival, you'd be forgiven for never noticing it. But we're not going to get treasure items here anyway because it's too shallow. Hey, I got another fishing rod. Wow, that feels a little pointless, don't it? So while this potion effect was initially added as an experimental feature, because map makers found a use for it, Mojang didn't remove it, which I gotta say on that part, that's pretty nice. When it was first added, leather armor was actually just about as good as regular diamond armor. And the reason for this is that armor protection used to be equal across all different armor types. So why would you even go through the effort of making yourself a set of diamond armor? Well, even though it all functioned the same, the truth is that the durability was not. So you could have all of this special armor, but it would run out, and you probably would have been better off trying to get something for diamonds if you wanted something more permanent. But considering how cheap it was to just get yourself a set of full leather armor, I mean, you can craft it up simply enough, that still feels like it would have been beneficial to get, especially early game. Leather armor also used to look different too. When you would die, it used to be the complete color would change, as opposed to having these brown patches. The original alpha bows had basically quick charge level 50, because when we would shoot them off, even an unenchanted bow would have spam click machine firing, meaning I could just easily shoot all of my arrows like so, and the only thing I'd have to worry about was the durability, and I guess my friend's safety, but that was a much lower priority. Oh, it's weird how much this changes the icon when you set it to quick charge 50. It just loads weirdly in the middle of the screen. When you used to find pumpkins out in the wild, they would always be carved pumpkins. There was really no difference between the two, but this was eventually changed so that there was a different state for all of our different pumpkins. But the benefit of this too is that they always generated in the same location. So if you needed yourself a basic compass, you did have a pumpkin that you could find that would point you in the right direction. Just one with an ominous face. And we wouldn't have the pumpkins that we know today until 1.13. Anytime that you eat a cake, it'll always eat it in the exact same direction, regardless of which way I'm facing. It always goes from west to east, which is a pretty big limitation if you wanted to make yourself a cake ladder, considering it's always got to be facing up towards the east. And really, I think this just goes to show you just how much of a forgotten feature the cakes are. It's not the best food source, and it's not even dynamic enough to be used in a lot of situations with its hitbox. Oh, but we can't add candles to it, so they remember it in some cases, just not in the cases of eating it. Go figure. Nowadays, we know that villages have the occasional chance of spawning as a zombie abandoned village. In the past, villages were all abandoned, considering that when villages were added in, they predated the villager mob themselves, back then called the Testificate. So when you would find one of these old situations with the gravel textures, it was all just a ghost town. It just feels so wrong walking through a village without hearing the villager sounds. I do miss the old light texture though. That's very fun, with the black wool and the 4 torches. So similar to how we use trapdoors to throw off mob pathfinding, we can do the same using powder snow. Check this out. This husk will go towards these turtle eggs, but it thinks the powder snow is a full block, and since it doesn't have leather boots, it just always falls in. And this would be any mob too. If we had a creeper over here on the other end, oh, sorry. If we had a creeper over here and I went into survival, then that creeper will just wander in there like so, making it a pretty safe place to keep your base, just as long as you have the right leather shoes. So here what we have is a stack of ladders, because originally you used to be able to climb ladders even if there was a 1 block gap in between. So if you wanted to save on ladders, you could just place it down like this. It looked a little ugly, but it was definitely functional. Although nowadays, the same can't be said. And really the closest thing that we could do to this nowadays is just by putting vines alternating in between. Or if I'm not mistaken, if we add in trap doors, because of the intended functionality where you can climb out of the trap door that goes on top of your ladder, it is possible to climb a stack of ladders like so in the current version. If you wanted to spawn a bee, then you should know that you have an occasional chance of spawning a bee by planting a sapling next to a flower. So if I were to grab out my sapling, plant it down like so, and then thank you. We were to take some bone meal and grow these up. By having that flower nearby, we increase our chances substantially of growing it with a bee's nest next to it. So if you need bees post-generation, this is the way to do it. But it's only a 5% chance, so I wouldn't hold your breath. Hey! And look at that. We've not only got a bee's nest, but we got a bee's nest with some bees inside. In the past, the way that we would power our minecarts was actually by using minecarts, because before powered rails were added in, we would use the collision physics of two different minecarts to be able to power ourselves up. And so, by moving a minecart in an adjacent track like so, it was possible to use that as a boosting station to keep us going. And the closest thing we could see to that in the base game nowadays is this formation here, which kind of looks like a 9, giving us the ability to infinitely build up momentum like so. When sponges were very first added in, they actually were pretty effective, soaking up water in a 5x5x5 field. But the way that this works is that they basically ended up being a water force field, and it was anytime that water entered their space, they would always remove it, which you can see why they eventually patched that out. It seems pretty buggy. But the way that they did this was pretty strange, considering that for a while, our sponges just didn't work at all, until finally being brought up to this level where we see it as they are today. They suck up the water, but they become a wet sponge they can't suck up anymore. So when our chests were originally added in, they used to be a full block in size, as opposed to the 14 pixel chests that we're familiar with today. Here's a comparison here. And because of this odd behavior, we could do things like place redstone and torches on top of them, which I gotta say, I actually do kind of like. It'd be nice for us to compact redstone, but considering that we could just use these like barrels nowadays, I suppose it wouldn't be very useful with the current implementation. And now it just makes it look like our chests are a little bit puffy, because the other trade-off for this is that we used to not be able to place our chests next to other chests. So if you didn't want to double chests next to each other, the way we would have to do is alternate between trap chest and regular chest, which was good for our trap chests, but nowadays we're just able to place our regular chests next to each other. Trap chests are basically forgotten. Doors have an odd situation with their hitbox, where because they're 2 blocks and we can flip them, we can step up 1 jump at a time while flipping it and basically use it as a way to scale 2 block jumps with only placing 1 block down. Oh, well, not much of a payoff, but if you're stuck in a hole and you need to get yourself out, this is a way to get out without letting any other mobs up, making it a good way to escape your mob pen if you need to. Back in the day, our furnaces used to take an extremely long time to break, and we could see as much here, so it wasn't uncommon to see people making bases out of furnaces, much in the same way that we would see other factions' bases using obsidian. And an extra benefit for this too on a multiplayer server is that they protected against X-ray, considering the fact that they count as containers in all these different X-ray packs, so you can't see through them in normal packs. It would just also be incredibly annoying to have to walk around your base and accidentally open up furnaces when you didn't need to. This is one I still miss to this day, but in the past, when we had bone meal, it would work in one single use. Anytime that you used it, whether it was for saplings or crops, it was always just 1 bone meal to rule them all. But this has since been changed. Now it takes a random amount of stages to do any kind of bone mealing. And while sometimes it might only take 2 to grow up our crops this fully, usually you're probably going to run about 3, which definitely makes our bone meal uses on farms a lot more expensive. So when the goat horns were added in the snapshots, we also had the copper horn that came with it. But this only ever made it into the bedrock version of the game, and ultimately it didn't make it into any full version of the game's release. But the idea for the copper horn was that you could use it, and anytime that you were using it, you could look up or down and change the pitch, and then look side to side, change the tone, giving you basically a musical instrument that you could play in any way. Although, we never got it, so the only thing you're playing with it is a whole lot of not much. And the stated reason for why it was removed was that it, quote, did not meet design goals. This structure might look familiar if you used to play in the Pocket Edition, because this was the Nether reactor, since these versions in particular didn't get the ability to have a regular Nether portal structure. So if you wanted the Nether to generate, you would have to build one of these with the special Nether reactor block in the inside, and then it would generate a Nether spire, basically functioning as a vertical slice of the Nether in your world. Whoa, that's pretty cool. And there we go, we've got our Nether spire, which I've got to say, I've never thought that Nether portals were particularly pretty to have around your base, but this is so much worse. And while it was a cool, unique feature, it was ultimately removed because those versions ended up getting a proper Nether, and this was basically pointless. And because the world wasn't big enough for a lot of these to generate in the regular biome, they would just end up giving you a whole bunch of items just because there was no other way to get them. So we know that beds explode when you use them in the Nether, but did you know that the opposite is true, and if you use a respawn anchor in the overworld, it'll explode like a bed does. So if you want to do something similar like bed PvP in the overworld, you would just place down one of these, a glowstone, and watch it explode. It even gives the fire that we're familiar with in the Nether. What's interesting to me though is that this is perfectly safe if you right click it without glowstone. It's only when you try to respawn from it that it would explode, and we get showed that you were killed by intentional game design. So this is a feature so forgotten that it actually feels like Mojang kind of forgot it too. And let me explain. Because if we use shears, we can clip the bottom of different vines like so and make it so that they don't grow past these points. And the way way that this all works is that it just sets the NBT of it to the max age so that it doesn't think that it needs to grow past that point. So I could set it up to random tick speed number 300. It won't grow anymore. But the reason that I feel like this feature's forgotten by Mojang is that while all of these other kinds of vines usually work with this, our regular vines don't. There's no way to clip the ends of your vines, which makes it very annoying to build with these. I'm right-clicking, no luck. So you might be familiar with the fact that you can normally go and craft up leather horse armor, making it the only craftable horse armor for us to use, and we could dye it as well. But did you know that you can actually prevent our horse from freezing much the way that regular leather armor works for us? So we put it into powder snow, it's completely fine, until I need it for warmth. Sorry, buddy. So one of the original anti-piracy measures for Minecraft was that you could download the game, but it would always say that you were using an unlicensed copy if you did. And then it would give you a link to go say, hey, purchase it at minecraft.net. Which is funny to see, particularly the fact that they would have removed it in the first place. I've never heard of someone getting rid of something that's anti-piracy. Now the fact that we use Microsoft accounts to log in, it might not be as necessary. Back before Notch knew what the different zombies were supposed to drop, originally the item that they would drop on death was feathers. So if I kill off these zombies, before rotten flesh wasn't even an item, all we would get was feathers, which I've never fully understood. But considering this is back around the time when pigs would drop brown mushrooms, it seemed like it was more a test if mobs should drop items and how they would do it, as opposed to what those items should be. This used to be one of the rarest structures that you could find in Minecraft, the brick pyramid. And while not a lot of these generated, they were always at predetermined coordinates, so if you knew where to go find one, you could see it about every 1,000 blocks. And for these, they would generate their top block at the build height back in the day, and then always generate downwards from there, existing only back in InfDev for Minecraft. Which, I gotta say, when you see it with the original brick texture, it looks a lot better than it does now. Now it just feels kind of bland. But a cool way to see one of those brick structures might have been with this feature, the isometric screenshot. Back in the day when you would hit F7, it would enable an isometric mode, letting you see the game in this odd way. And a lot of times when you would do this, you would just get large chunks of the world that never generated properly. But it was meant to show all the different mobs on the map too, which could have been a cool way to take screenshots with your friends. Before the Eyes of Ender were added, the way that you would go and find the strongholds was because of these glass pillar markers. Yeah, no joke. The way that we would go and mark these back in the debug feature was just that strongholds would have a giant tower of glass to help you find them. Does work, but it's obviously not the most pretty. And you would find these spawning above both the entrance and the portal room of a stronghold, making it an easy way for the development phase to go and find where they're supposed to be, if not a little obtrusive. Back when you started up in the in-dev version of Minecraft, you would always spawn inside of this structure called the starting house, which wasn't a looker, but it definitely was a starting house. Oh, this is also back when things would stack up to 99, giving you an easy way to get started when you were exploring the world. But considering there wasn't much to do in the game in the way of survival, this was really just more of a debug feature that people were allowed to see. In an alternate world in Minecraft, we would have been using gears instead of redstone, since this was another feature that we had back in the in-dev versions of the game, and the idea was that to make machines work in the game, we would have these connect up different things, even working along with cogs on blocks like so. But you know that this got replaced with redstone to eventually fit the game's more fantasy theming, considering that anyone who had these placed down in their world, they did just swap out for redstone automatically, which does fortunately mean that if we use a simple redstone resource pack, we can switch it back. A mob that was originally teased back in the alpha versions, never actually made it in except for its textures, is the pigmen, which the idea would have been that instead of the villagers that we see today, we would have had these pigman creatures that we would have interacted with. The coolest idea would have been that we could have hired them with different materials to work as bodyguards. But while that idea was shelved, the idea to have zombie pigmen wasn't. And that would end up being the nether inhabitants for much of the game until they were replaced with zombified piglins when we got the regular piglins as well. Did you know there's a way to make an obsidian farm in the end? And I'm not talking about the pillars, but instead I'm talking about this platform. Since any time that anyone goes through the portal, it'll always regenerate this 5x5 platform of obsidian. And so if we have a way to automatically break the obsidian through something like a wither, we could technically give ourselves a way of always farming obsidian. So if I were to get rid of some here, then all of these steaks and pork chops that are getting thrown through will always generate new ones. Fire continues to be something that Mojang has to nerf in Minecraft, and one of the reasons for that is that back in old versions of the game, it was particularly destructive. So in the past, if you accidentally went and set up your treehouse with some kind of fireplace, that fire would spread infinitely. And especially on harder difficulties, that would make it basically unsalvageable to save the place. And usually we would just leave instead of having to play firefighter. It was a lost cause. In the past, the way that we would ignite our TNT blocks was just by punching them, meaning that if you placed down a TNT in your world, the only way to get rid of it was by exploding it. So you had to be real confident about where you were placing it, since if you wanted to get rid of it, no luck. But the truth is that we're still able to get this in vanilla using the right command. All we have to do is just give ourselves the block state unstable TNT. So a lot of you know how to build cobblestone generators, but a rare thing to know how to do was the old obsidian generation, which is that by placing running water next to a block and then putting a redstone dust on that block, we could then have lava flow over top and give ourselves infinitely generating obsidian. So basically the way of switching our cobblestone generator into an obsidian generator was just that it would cost a redstone for each block that we generated, which, considering how annoying obsidian has been historically to find, it was probably worth spending a little bit of redstone to get yourself some obsidian in a safer manner. One of the weirdest ways of finding obsidian back in the day was the obsidian walls that would generate, because for a 2-week stint back in the debug phases of the early Minecraft inf dev, the world generated with these obsidian walls that would span across the world. They weren't exactly the biggest walls, they were only 2 blocks tall in size, but they were definitely an eyesore, and trying to get rid of them, I mean, they were obsidian, so it would take a whole long time to go and mine through it, which is why it became one of the ugliest structures ever removed from Minecraft. So if we toggle on the game rule for limited crafting, then even though I obviously know in my head about how to craft a diamond sword, if I went to go try it, the recipe wouldn't be there. And in fact, we would have to use the knowledge book item to actually unlock this, which feels a lot more like a proper RPG. And now I know the proper way to make my diamond sword. It's a great feature for map makers, but it's definitely not something you're going to hear about a lot in vanilla Minecraft. Chainmail isn't an item that you're thinking about much in Minecraft anyways, but you probably think even less about the fact that we were able to craft chainmail back in the day, particularly because the only way that we could craft it was with creative mode given items. Since back before the flattening, one of the later updates made it so that a lot of the different items for debug were removed, we could get ourselves an actual fire item, and then by using that, we could craft it into chainmail, which for something you were only going to get if you were an admin on the server, it wasn't even all that impressive as an armor set. Really, the only time I ever see chainmail get used is if a skeleton spawns with it, or if you're playing on a PvP server where it's about the same level as gold. The old way that we had to get seeds for farming was that we had to go and hoe the grass around our base, which this is a lot cleaner than the system ever would have been in your world. Since to get a few seeds back then, you'd have to take your hoe to every grass block in the surrounding area, trashing the place before you got enough. Not the prettiest system for sure. And eventually the way that we got our seeds was just by punching the weak grass that would generate in something like the plains biome. Iron farms back in the day used to be a mess. And the reason for that is that you had to place down not only a whole bunch of doors to get it to spawn as a village, but you also needed to place all of those doors specifically to get it to work properly. If even one of those was off, it was going to ruin your entire setup. And while 1.14 definitely made the village system a lot easier to understand, it's always been easily exploitable too. The default spawner block used to always generate with a pig spawner in mind. And as a result, if you had something weird that messed up the NBT of a naturally generating spawner, it would change it into a pig spawner. Now, an easy opportunity that you would see for this was in a mine shaft, where it would try to generate a chest and a cave spider spawner in the same place. That would mess it up, giving us this weird structure of 5 pig spawners. And stranger still was that these would work to actually generate pigs. You would just need enough light and enough grass blocks nearby. So if you're lucky enough to find it, I guess you could technically make a mob farm, but nowadays our spawners don't even generate this way, so it's impossible to get that way. Those aren't the only spawners we have in mind, since what we have here is a block called a water spawner, which basically was a block that would always generate water regardless of if you filled it up. So no matter how many blocks we placed down, sponges we used to drain it, or anything else, the water would always flow in, making it impossible to ruin the ocean in this way. And the same would happen for lava too. But this was another in-dev feature that we haven't seen since. When you used to go down to the lower levels of the world, there was bedrock void fog that we would start to creep in. But this was ultimately removed during the development of 1.8. Though it's something that's so iconic that a lot of players would love to see this back in as well. It actually feels like something that would have fit particularly well with the deep slate changes back in the caves and cliffs, especially when it used to be called Grimstone for that block. Back in the day when you wanted to respawn the Ender Dragon, the way that they made you do this was by placing down a creeper face made of clay. So the early debug stage would be just placing down this creeper face structure full of clay blocks, which could be placed horizontally like so or vertically, and that would respawn the dragon. This is added back in Snapshot 15W13A before we eventually got it replaced back with the proper way of doing it for the 1.9 snapshots of 15W44A.
And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?